Thank you all. It's great to be here, finally, as we said. I'm a little disappointed I bought my ballet shoes and I can't wear them tomorrow, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. I've been sitting here reading a lot of your bios, and I Googled a lot of you before I came, and I was sitting here wondering why I'm the keynote speaker, because I'm really not a historic preservationist, although I've dabbled in it, I must confess, in some ways. And I was thinking about how I got to this point and what led me here. What I'm going to do today is talk about 3 different projects. Abandoned place will be the majority of it, and then I have one little extra thing that's not exactly historic preservation related, but I think you'll enjoy it. And it's, I got to turn it on probably. There we go. The ON position. So this is me holding the sign there. It says Marble's Last Ride. And this is the only picture I'm going to show you of me as a kid, don't worry. And this is about 1965 at our community's Kids Day Parade, where you'd make floats and dress up and have fun. And this was in the thick of our race to the moon. And of course, our neighbor's cat, Marbles, is in the little chicken wire rocket there with some dry ice, and my sisters and our neighbors, the Locks. But this shows you, I mean, I was into this stuff as a kid, as many people my age will tell you that. I do think NASA should think about adding the capes, because it would be much cooler in the ISS if you had a cape and you were weightless. I think you could fly like Superman. Fast forward from that, I was teaching photography here at what was the time Brevard Community College, now it's Eastern Florida State College. And I got a call from an environmental engineer out at the Cape, and he said, we are remodeling an old office building in the industrial area. It hasn't been used in about 10 years, and he said, we found a darkroom in this building, and we don't know what to do with the... Closer to me? Okay. Yeah. I unfortunately don't project at all. And he said, we found a darkroom, and there's a bunch of chemicals. We don't know what to do with them. If you could, come out and help me deal with them. If they're any good, you can have them for the college, and if not, if you'll help me dispose of them properly. And I said, sure, that'd be fine. We could always use free chemicals. So when I got out there, long story short, he had to run an errand, and he said, do you mind? I said, no, this is Cape Canaveral, man. I grew up watching this stuff as a kid. I don't mind. And he said prophetically, well, have you ever seen one of the old pads? And I'm like, I didn't know there were old pads. So he took me here to the Gemini Launch Complex, Complex 19, and we pulled up, and I got out of the car, and I immediately knew, well, I have to photograph this. This has got to be documented. First of all, it's beautiful, interesting, historic, and so it took about 2 years to get access. Everyone I knew, even public affairs, they would have taken me out, but I wanted to do kind of a more artistic approach to it. I even used an 8x10 camera for some of the beginnings, and the public affairs guy said, well, I got a bunch of people who want to go out there. We'll go out there for half an hour someday. And I'm thinking, half an hour? It's going to take me half an hour to set my camera up. So eventually, I was getting my hair cut, and my barber asked me, he goes, so what do you do with your photography? And I go, well, I got this crazy idea. Blah, blah. He goes, oh, I'll get you out there. I'm like, George, I appreciate it, but I've been trying, for 2 years, and he said, no, I'll get you out there. I'm like, yeah, I know you know a guy. He's like, he goes, I'm dating the assistant to the director of public affairs. And so sure enough, he set up a meeting for us, and she got what I was talking about. She said, we'll take you out there a couple times, see what happens from that. I'm like, that'd be great. So he did that. I went out and photographed a couple times, and then I took that work and showed it to Chuck Hollinghead, who was the director of public affairs, and he's like, yeah, this is great, we need to keep doing this. And then I was able to work with the Air Force, and they were very supportive, and from 1991 to 93, I really did a bulk of the work out there, and it was good because there was a lot more left at that point. So this is that same gantry looking at a different view. This is looking up, so the Gemini gantry was hinged at the base, and they would lay it down before the launch, and after the last launch, there it lay. And you can see over time what happens to it. So this is 1991. This is looking from where the rocket would be up towards what is the white room there when it's laid down. And here you see the same view in 1990 and in 2005. It's hard to see because the white room's in the way. Here's a little better version of it. This is 1991, again, from looking at the side. And I wasn't trying to do what they call a rephotographic process, and I just would randomly take the same picture when I could. Here's a similar picture. There was a pile of debris, or I couldn't get to the same exact spot. But here's the same thing. And I think this area here is this area here. And so a lot more rust, a lot more decay. It was obvious, even on that first trip out there, that this stuff there was no way to preserve it, there was no way to save it. It was not going to last. And here it was, the last time I saw it in 2011. In about 2012 and 2013, I believe they dismantled all the metal. And so I think all that's left is a cement structure you see at the base of it. It was really a fascinating structure. And the Gemini program, is kind of the middle child, I like to say, of Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, because it wasn't the first and it didn't go to the moon, but it was critical in getting to the moon. If we hadn't had the experience of docking in space and many, many other technical abilities the astronauts had to master, we would have never gotten to the moon. So here's Complex 34, which was the site of the Apollo 7 launch and also the Apollo 1 fire. That rephotographic approach I've talked about, there's a photographer named Mark Klett who went back and photographed the landscapes that the early explorer photographers like Timothy O'Sullivan and others did. And he would find the exact spot, find the same lens, same camera, and rephotograph exactly the same spot. And you could see how it changed. It's a really fascinating project. It's called the rephotographic process. And I considered, well, maybe I could do that, maybe I could do that. And then I realized quickly, that's all that's left. I'd have a whole bunch of pictures with sky and not much else. And it also limits you as your ability to approach the subject. So I just started photographing it, and I took the approach where I was kind of coming at it, I'll call it roughly quantitative and qualitative. A better term would be kind of concrete or documentary and abstract. I was using both techniques to record this because I wanted to show the detail, but I also wanted people to see the overall setting. And this phrase, abandoned or abandoned in place, is stenciled on these facilities all over the Cape. I've seen a few at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And it's really a civil engineering term that says, hey, basically, we're no longer maintaining this. I believe it was actually done so when the base would get inspected by the generals, people wouldn't get in trouble for these overgrown, rotting away launch sites. And the reason they didn't tear these down is, and you can blow anything up if you use enough explosives. It's not really true that you can't blow it up. But the engineers were worried that if they used enough explosives, remember these were designed to have rockets explode right on top of them, which they often did. If you used enough explosives to take these structures down, they were worried they would damage the aquifers. So they just let them where many of them still stand. In this image, oddly, and this is one of the things I started looking for, there's a lot of text on these structures, a lot of references to different things. Here's something, it says abandoned in place, but something was bolted in that bracket channel there that left a ghost image of what looks like an E. So the very kind of metaphorical abandoned in peace, and to me, a reference to the Apollo 1 fire. Complex 34 is a very emotional, very spiritual site to me. I've been there at all times of day. The light's always different. It's just a very moving spot. I'm not sure if we get to go there tomorrow or not, or on Thursday. The other thing I'd look for were references to what was going on. So here's one of the old NASA logos mounted on the outside of the Mercury Mission Control Building, and the oxidation trail from the water looks like a contrail to me. So I'm trying to tie in what was going on, and also, again, I'm an artist, make a beautiful photograph, make something that was interesting. Here's another case. This is a flooded room underneath. inside that cement structure at pad 19. And I took this picture and didn't realize what was going to happen. I would shoot early in the morning to get the warm light, and I used a very low film speed of 25 ISO film. And so I do these long, like 30-second exposures. This was probably even longer. And what I didn't realize is the little reflections in the water, as the water was moving, became little galaxies to me. So here's that overall view, and many people have said this before me, but the feeling out at Complex 34 is it's very much like being at a place like Stonehenge. These massive structures. I also noticed other very obvious and less obvious references to other archaeological sites. So the blockhouses, these domed blockhouses that are common on what they call Rocket Row, really look a lot like a pyramid, pretty obvious. Then there are other things. This is the structure at Complex 9, which was the Navajo complex. So back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, you know, I call it a shotgun approach. There were all these different programs to develop rockets, ballistic and air-breathing, winged rockets. And some of them made it, some of them didn't. The Navajo never made it into production, but they really kind of honed in inertial guidance from that rocket. So even the programs that weren't successful led to everything that came afterwards. So here's the Temple of the Deer at Chichen Itza. Again, not quite so literal, but I remember taking the photograph, even though I took this later on, thinking, this photograph thinking, this looks like some kind of mine, some kind of ancient ruin. And then, of course, the vehicle assembly building, which I guess we'll get to go to, which is great on tomorrow. I refer to it as the temple to technology because it's a really amazing building. It at one time was the largest indoor single structure in the world. The Boeing facility in Seattle eclipsed it pretty quickly after that. But it's 525 feet high, and you're looking straight up to at the top. That's 525 feet of building. When they first built it, it was so massive, they would develop rain clouds and it would rain on them, so they had to update the HVAC system to control that. Very much like a cathedral to me, even to the point of the arches and the braces and even the X-bracing in the ceiling. Even the layout of the building references to me a Gothic cathedral. It's a very beautiful place. And the amazing thing about the vehicle assembly building is it was built for Apollo, it was used for the shuttle, and now it's being used for Artemis. This building is over 50 years old, and it's still very prominent in the processes. So I just broke these, instead of individual spots, I broke them into launch pads and a few other types of structures. So you have something very simple like this. This is the Mercury launch pad, which I think we'll get to see if we go to Complex 26. And there's just a little tiny stand and a little tiny flame deflector. Not a big deal. Wait till you see what the shuttle launch pad looks like. This is the launch wing at Complex 34. And I photographed this over time as well. This is 1990. This is the first time I photographed it. And it was restored in 1998. And this is 2 years later. If you look carefully, you can see the rust starting to come back in the seams. And I really wanted to get a photograph like this because it's such, like I said, to me it's a very emotional place. I've gotten through the Apollo 1 Memorial Foundation and through the ceremonies they would have on the anniversary of the fire. I've gotten to know some of the family members. So it became very personal. And this is, the last time I was out there was 2018, and this is what it looked like. So, you know, and I believe now the Taurus, the deluge ring is gone. I'm not sure what else is gone, but it's, you know, and it's not that anybody's not caring for this stuff. They spent quite a bit of money restoring it, but when you build stuff right on the ocean in Florida, it's made out of metal, it's not going to last. This is a fuel tank at Complex 13. To me, this is more about this kind of ghostly image of missile fuel. You just don't see that term very often, at least in my life. And then the pattern of the rust. So this is more the abstract, trying to tell part of the story in a different manner. So mobile service structures and launch umbilical towers. So I put this in, this is when Complex 36 was still active. So this is the launch umbilical tower. Many of you are aware of this already, but just in case you're not, here's the mobile service tower, or mobile service structure, or gantry is kind of the former term for that. I also photographed all over the country. I had an exhibit in 1994 for the 25th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing at the Huntsville Museum of Art, and the curator there said, why don't you come to Huntsville and photograph our stuff too? And I was like, wow, that's a great idea. And then once I did that, I thought, well, I've got to go everywhere. And I haven't been everywhere. And I hope to talk to some of you about places you know that I might still be able to go to, because this is kind of a project that never really ends. I just keep expanding it. So this is at White Sands, Missouri. This is where they first tested the V2 rockets. That's not a V2, that's a Hermes A1, which was our own American rocket we were working with. They don't have a V2 to put on display. Interestingly, there, no rust, pretty much no rust. I mean, in the middle of White Sands, doesn't get much more deserty than White Sands. So they have a much easier time maintaining that launch stand. This is Complex 13 again. This Complex 13 was the most complete launch complex that existed. I guess, yeah, really anywhere on the Cape. The Gemini complex was fairly complete when I started this project. And I'd heard, I was telling Catherine this, one of my escorts told me that at some point in the late 80s, early 90s, they'd had a conference about what they could do with this. Could they give tours of this? And the estimate was it would cost $10 million to restore it to where it was safe and $2 million a year to maintain it. And the budget, years later, I heard from the guy in charge of facilities at the Cape, the budget for roads and everything in their general maintenance, not the actual launch complexes, because usually those are the programs, was $1.5 million. So where was that money going to come from? And sadly, this, you know, when we first went photographing there, we could climb up to the top, and the views from the top of these towers are just amazing. You just see way down the coast. So you see the gantry here, the mobile service tower. This is a launch umbilical tower. This is a ramp where they'd wheel the rocket up and lift it up into place. The Saturn V launch umbilical tower for years was stacked up kind of behind the headquarters building at KSC. I had never seen photographs of how they moved it, but those sections have got to be at least 30 feet square. And I have no idea how they move this stuff. I would love to find out. And there was a group that was trying to put together the money to restore it and put it back up. Again, they could never raise near enough funds for it. So it was eventually scrapped, but prior to that, some pieces were saved. So the top few levels and the crane are at the Saturn V Center. I climbed up on one and photographed the elevator doors here. And I want to say, I'm not doing this to point fingers or say shame, shame. It's just a matter, you'll see what happens here. Here it is on display at the Saturn V Center. And so to give you a comparison, they just sprayed everything green, including the black elevator buttons. Now, they spent a lot of money restoring that Saturn V rocket, which is much more important than the elevators. And maybe this has been, I haven't seen this Saturn V Center in quite a few years. Maybe they've done more and undone some of this restoration. But this is what happens. You know, this is, you do what you can do at the time, I guess. Another story, though, is the White Room. Now, this is where human beings first left Earth to set foot on another celestial body. And here it was, sitting out, rusting away. The Kansas Cosmosphere got it and restored it. And I was lucky enough to photograph Gunter Wendt, who was the pad leader for Apollo and the other programs. His autobiography came out at the same time I had an exhibit there, and so they brought us in together, and he gave me a personal tour, which is one of the highlights of my life of the White Room. He was just an amazing, funny, wonderful human being. And I understood why the astronauts trusted him. You spend any time with a man like that, you understood him. So they did it right, as far as I could tell. I mean, Here are some of the, just as to give you an idea, inside the mobile service structure, looking through the, it's just green corrugated fiberglass. It's not some high-tech material. And that's one of the funny things. Some of the stuff at these sites, super high-tech. Like, what is that? How did they make that? Some stuff, it's just green corrugated fiberglass. How are we gonna protect the rocket from the weather? Green corrugated fiberglass, why not? That opening there is a spot for the umbilicals to come through from the launch umbilical tower to the rocket. Now I noticed a pattern when I was photographing the pads while they were being decommissioned and while they were being built. Anybody see the pattern? I think someone was intentionally matching the outhouses to the launch pads, because if you have a green and gray launch tower, you need a green and gray outhouse. If you have a white launch tower, you need a white one. And if you have a gray and white launch tower, you must have a gray and white porta potty. Little aside. Blockhouses. So, again, I think we'll see a blockhouse on Thursday. This is the one from Complex 5. I've never been inside that. I don't know what it's like inside, but 26, I believe, is similar. This is inside Complex 34's blockhouse. So I was involved with this group that did a memorial service out there before they actually started doing an official one. And so we would get into the blockhouse. They've determined that all those blockhouses have asbestos in the tile and other places, so they're pretty much off limits these days. I also heard stories, and actually may have found evidence, people used to put shoe polish on the viewers of those are periscopes, so you could watch the launch from. And one time I think either it was the rubber decaying into black or somebody actually put shoe polish on one. Really fascinating blockhouses at Complex 31 and 32. These, I call them the beehive blockhouses. They're made of like cement sandbags, basically, that they put in place. Again, I've never been in those. Still, asbestos, I believe, is the issue. Another type of blockhouse, this is at Complex 29. There's a similar one at 30, I believe, that's kind of almost two-story. The glass on these blockhouses is layer after layer of glass, huge. Same doors, similar doors to the Blockhouse 5 doors. Here's Complex 18. This is the other side. These are the windows. Blockhouse 13, which has now been demolished. Complex 13, by the way, now is actually landing zone 1 for the SpaceX Falcon rockets. And that is part of the issue, the issue with preserving this stuff as well. I understood pretty quickly that Cape Canaveral is a very unique piece of real estate. It's a great spot for launching rockets out over the ocean where you're not going to drop them on somebody's head. But that means reutilizing some of those. So Complex 37, the white launch tower you saw with the porta potty, that had been the Apollo Complex 37. It was turned into a Delta 4 launch complex. This is now gone, and that whole complex is landing zone 1 for the Falcon rockets. And they had these neat illustrations of all the launches. And there's one on, I think Complex 14 Blockhouse still has last time I knew it was restored as a conference center. I'm not sure what its status is, but it was restored. It was made into a conference center, so it's, the equipment's gone. And, I trained in art, but I could never make anything that amazingly beautiful and intricate if I tried. And this is how we were launching rockets. Those are the wires that connect things to launch rockets. Fascinating. And then we might see that, I believe that's in the Blockhouse 26. So those kind of domed blockhouses all had tunnels that ran out to the pad. Blockhouses are a thing of the past, because it used to be you had to be real close to launch a rocket, which is not good when a rocket has that much potential to destroy things. So they had these tunnels that they would run. Those are all cable trays that are gone on the left side. You see one left. But you could access the superstructure of the launch pad directly from the blockhouse. And this is Complex 36 as they're dismantling it. Two interesting things. One, they were decommissioning it, and I can't remember which company had the contract, but they were going, some of the equipment in the racks was NASA or Air Force, government, and some was the contractors. The contractor was literally pulling all of their equipment out and throwing it in a dumpster because they didn't want whoever came in after them to have access to their resources. That stuff could have all gone to museums probably. One of my escorts, a guy named Johnny Johnson, who was kind of the facilities director of Cape Canaveral for quite a while, he was petitioning them to padlock the doors to this blockhouse and walk away and leave it as a time capsule. Of course they didn't. They didn't do that. I also wanted to look at where this all came from. So the early rockets that we launched people on were really IRBM and ICBM missiles. Talk about turning swords into plowshares. So I wanted to photograph a silo. I was able to get into the 395 Charlie silo at Vandenberg, and really a fascinating place. These escape suits were critical because they used liquid-fueled rockets. The interesting thing about this picture, though, is that cabinet in the back. Whoops, what did I do? I turned my thing off. They misspelled the word safety, which, when you're in a nuclear missile silo, is not reassuring. I don't know, and it's a stencil. So, other things photographed were the, I'm going to go through these kind of quick, research and test facilities. So there were a lot of rocket engine test stands around the country. And there were really two types. The ones in the south are massive structures. This is the B-12 test site. They had to build them because they had to be able to mount the rocket high enough to not let the flame and exhaust interfere with the test. Out west, they started hanging them off the sides of mountains and the sides of canyons, so like at Edwards and Santa Susana. So still massive structures. And here's the understructure of one at Edwards Air Force Base. Some of the technology. I've also been accused that I took this picture in Russia and forgot, because there's Cyrillic writing. You guys probably can't see it, but there's fading through the paint, there's Cyrillic text, and I'm not sure if they bought steel from some country that uses Cyrillic text, but people have said, no, you took that in Russia and you forgot. I'm like, I've never been to Russia. I don't know why. Wind tunnels, another part of the whole program. And this was the 30 by 60 foot full-scale wind tunnel at Langley, fabulous building. Again, to try to maintain this, for a while, Old Dominion University had basically rented it from NASA. But a massive structure and no way to, just the cost of keeping roofs. A lot of times, like Mercury Mission Control, it was the roof failed, and then it got moldy in there, and that was it. Even going into the office buildings. This is the NASA headquarters, designed by Charles Luckman. Some of you are probably familiar with the fact that he greatly boosted the historic preservation movement by tearing down Penn Station in New York. And then ironically, his building gets torn down. Maybe it's some kind of karma, I don't know. It was a really neat building, but again, a lot of issues with it, inefficient. I was able to get in and photograph that for a day. Oh. And even things like the parking lot. You just don't see an astronaut parking spot very often. And what I really liked about this was the little palm frond there was echoing the Delta Wing and the NASA logo. So what's happened with these? Well, this is just some of what I photographed, and this is what's left. And there's probably more gone that I don't know about because I haven't been back to a lot of these sites. So one thing leads to another, and I began photographing the space shuttle program. I'm going to go through these kind of quick because I'm getting short on time. Both from an abstract, again, I took that same approach in documentary, trying to get different viewpoints. My goal is, there are some photographs here that other people have taken very similar things, but my hope is that most of them are different. Like I knew there was texture on the external tank. I had no idea there was texture on the solid rocket booster frustum. This is when they have to hang the shuttle before they would launch it and photograph it, so they had to hang it there for several hours so it would stop moving. It looked like some giant, like manta ray, some sea creature. Here's the Apollo. So think back to the Mercury launch pad. This is the Apollo, the shuttle launch pad. Very complex. It reminds me of one of those cartoons where the guy runs through the wall, and he leaves the shape in the wall and just made it just the right size. And things that other people wouldn't necessarily photograph, like the fire control system. But as a photographer, I'm looking at the light and the color and other things as well, so trying to combine all that. And we built a whole shuttle launch complex in California that we never used because just a few months before they were supposed to have the first launch, we lost the Challenger. And the Air Force said, maybe not. There were other reasons as well, but that didn't help. It was like the most space launch looking complex. It was really cool. They still use parts of it. I can't remember what's in there now. Oop, going too fast. This was the main propulsion test article. They actually attached 3 main engines to this and tested 3 main engines together. They actually stopped. They were taking this apart when I was photographing. They stopped working so I could make some photographs of it. Got out to Thiokol, which is not far from where I live in Utah. The building has more green corrugated fiberglass. Most of the walls are green corrugated fiberglass because if there's an explosion, it just blows out the fiberglass and the building's main structure isn't too badly damaged. I think if you're working in a building like that, you might want to reconsider your job. Same thing with this. If you work in a building with a 25-foot diameter radiation symbol, maybe you should. And the funny thing, my film came out weird that day. I never was able to get exactly the color I should be able to get. I don't know if I got X-rayed or not, but I doubt it. I'm sure they're careful. And then I photographed these. These are sections of the top of the external tank. To me, they look like masts on a tall ship, sails on a tall ship. So trying to bring those references in. I'm going to go through these quick because I'm going to run out of time. Trying to see things that other people haven't seen in the same way. Details that might get lost. And there are millions and millions and millions of photographs of the space shuttle, so it's hard to do that. It's a big ask. I like this. So you see all the cracked and burned and crumbly tiles up there. This was on its way to get mated to a tank and basically on its way to be launched. And they only fixed the stuff they need. Cosmetics didn't matter. And one of the things, you could really see the age on the exterior of these shuttles. You could see the wear and tear. Repairing tile, really, the strings. I couldn't paint something that abstract if I would never think of that. It just wouldn't. It's a really beautiful. Whoops. I don't know if Chad's here. Is Chad here? He may not be here yet. I was able to get in and photograph them cleaning the shuttle. Atlantis on display in the Kennedy Space Center. Really fascinating. They rappel down with vacuums and brooms and clean it off. Have to do it about every year. So what do you do with an old launch tower? You tear it down. And I think I have a quick, I can make this play. If I can make it play. Well, it's not going to play for me. That's all right. Another project I did, so I was out at a launch and they brought some astronauts in to talk to the press, and one of them was Katie Coleman. And Katie had contacted me. I had work up in the crew quarters in the late 1990s, and she had called me at the college to say how much she liked the work. And I was at a conference, and I came back and she was gone. And 15 years later, I meet her at a lunch, and she's like, "Oh," she goes, I wish there was a way we could get your photographic approach, your vision to the astronauts on the space station. She's like, would you think about that? And when an astronaut says something like that to you, you say, well, yes, I will think about that, certainly. So anyway, came up with a project, and I'd photographed the pieces of the station before it was launched and different research facilities. This is where they do the HVAC testing. The neutral buoyancy lab where they have a mock-up underwater of the station. And the cupola training. And there's two facilities for the two mock-ups. There's the space station vehicle mock-up and the space station space vehicle mock-up facility, space station training facility. This is the training facility, which is where they do the hands-on training with the equipment. The mock-up facility, they do emergency egress stuff. And that's the exterior of it. And so there are little cubicles kind of for the training facility, whereas this is the mock-up facility. And I was hoping to photograph the mock-up facility in an effort to work with this astronaut and be able to direct him. So what Katie did was I sent her a proposal about my how I would do that photography, and she said, this is great, but you need to have an astronaut on board, and I've got the perfect guy, Paolo Nespoli. So she connected us, and Paolo and I started photographing, and this is a photograph Paolo took of that same area. Now you can tell that the real thing is quite a bit different than that. So it didn't really help me too much. But, and this is what I was trying to overcome with this work. This is what a typical, this isn't from our project, this is a typical photograph from the ISS where they're photographing someone doing something with a flash on the camera. And the inverse square of law of light dictates that light falls off inversely square, so the light falls off dramatically as you go back and it's all dark. That's not what it looks like when you're on the station. This is what it looks like. So what I wanted Paolo to do was photograph without using a flash, which sounds easy, but it's not very bright in there, and you can't use a tripod because it floats up. Anyway, we did use a flash to balance the exterior with the interior in a few cases. Here's Paolo photographing, and he came up with a way to connect the camera on two places on the wall. He's got a tablet with the pictures I sent him that he's recreating on the station. And what I did was I went into the Google Street View, which came out literally while I was down photographing. My security escort told me about it. I would do screen captures and send them to Paolo, and Paolo would recreate them. And it's amazing how well he did this. And he had to respond to what was actually there because things change, but we did a whole series of different images that documents the station in a way that really isn't being done, or wasn't being done. Things like the little operations desk. This is the equipment lock, and in the back is the crew lock. This is where they do the spacewalks from. You see the spacesuits there. Little details that wouldn't get observed otherwise. A little model of the space shuttle stuck up on the wall. Oh, that's weird. And then he was able to get this amazing photograph. And you're not looking up at the sky, you're looking down at clouds over the water. So we were able to document the space station in a way that, wouldn't be possible otherwise. And now, because now he had to do this on his own time. He didn't do this during his astronaut time. But there's, they're not going to be able to bring those modules back as far as anyone can figure at this point without the space shuttle. So this, I thought it was important to document it in a way that it would look as if you're, again, millions of photographs of the inside of the space station, not like this. And then another little quick thing I'm just going to show you briefly because I'm running close on time here. I want to leave some time for questions. I shouldn't tell you this, but I created a wormhole generator and developed the ability to break the speed of light. And so I've been photographing these exoplanets for a while. But you can't tell anybody. It's a big secret. I'm actually starting a project now working on Artemis as well, so that'll be my next thing. But in the meantime, I've been making these exoplanet photographs, and I'm tying these images. Obviously, I'm not really traveling through space, But I'm finding things to photograph and tying them to real planets and looking at the physics of the planet as best I can with my limited knowledge of science, and trying to make images that, or actually I'm trying to find planets that will work with the images I make. So literally you might, because none of us know what exoplanets are going to look like, and none of us are probably going to ever see pictures like this of exoplanets. And I thought, darn it, I'm not going to be around. I want to see what these look like, so I'm just going to make it up myself. And just to show you, this is not my photograph. This is a real photograph from NASA by the Mars Odyssey. This stuff looks like this. I mean, the stuff I'm making looks kind of crazy, but it really, so now you can tell I'm actually getting these photographs. I found this really cool junkyard up in Idaho that has these amazing 1950s and 60s cars. And I thought, I don't want to just do what we lovingly call patina porn. I want to make something more, and they look, a lot of them look like landscapes to me, so that's what I did. And just a whole, I'm just kind of getting started in this, but we'll see what comes from it. And that is my presentation, so thank you.